December 19th, 1948, at dawn, Dutch paratroopers dropped from the sky. Within hours, the heart of the Indonesian Republic is struck. President Sukarno is arrested. The Dutch flag once again flies over Yogyakarta. On paper, it's a flawless military victory. But here's the irony. While the Netherlands captures the enemy's leaders, it loses the war. Operation Crow proves that you can seize a capital and still lose a country. By 1948, the Kingdom of the Netherlands was at war with the Republic of Indonesia for several years now. The Indonesian War of Independence started in August 1945. On August 17th, Indonesian nationalist Sukarno declared the Republic of Indonesia independent. This happened in the wake of the Japanese surrender. The Japanese had occupied the archipelago ever since the Dutch surrender in March 1942. For centuries, the Indonesian islands were part of the Dutch colonial empire. The phasing of the War of Independence depends on the perspective one chooses. From an Indonesian perspective, the struggle did not truly come to an end until the transfer of Papua New Guinea in 1962. Moreover, a number of internal Indonesian conflicts that emerged in the years 1945-1949 continued in part into the 1960s. When focusing on the Dutch military involvement in the war, a division into four phases is made, running from the 15th of August 1945 to the formal transfer of sovereignty on the 27th of December 1949. It is important to establish that the main combat operations of the Indonesian War of Independence took place on Java and, to a lesser extent, Sumatra. Elsewhere in the archipelago, Dutch reoccupation was effective and the Republic gained less of a foothold, although there were brief but bloody conflicts elsewhere. The first phase of the Indonesian War of Independence lasted from the Japanese surrender proclamation of independence in August 1945 until the Lincoln-Jati Agreement and the British withdrawal in late 1946. During this period, Indonesian armed forces were rapidly formed, while Dutch military presence was initially limited. British troops were responsible for disarming the Japanese and evacuate civilians, but became unintentionally involved in the conflict, prompting them to push for negotiations and a quick exit. This phase was marked by extreme violence, including the Bersia period and the Battle of Surabaya, as well as widespread unrest and mass casualties. These are very interesting topics I would love to expand on in future episodes. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing and please do hit that notification bell. The second phase, from November 1946 to August 1947, was characterized by continuous skirmishes, escalating ceasefire violations, and the gradual collapse of the Lincoln-Jati Agreement. Dutch forces expanded their control through military action, culminating in a very first large-scale offensive, Operation Product, in Indonesia known as Agresi Militer Belanda I. Meaning the first Dutch military aggression. Although militarily successful, resulting in Dutch control over large parts of Java and Sumatra, the offensive failed to destroy the Indonesian armed forces or end the conflict. The third phase, from August 1947 to December 1948, focused on Dutch attempts at pacification and consolidation of conquered territory. Indonesian forces shifted largely to guerrilla warfare, while Dutch counterinsurgency efforts proved ineffective. Political developments, including the Renville Agreement and the suppression of the communist Maidan uprising, strengthened the Indonesian Republic's international standing. Despite military pressure, Dutch forces lacked popular support and faced growing strategic and political difficulties, leading to the decision to launch the second major offensive at the end of 1948. Operatie Kraai, or Crow, and in Indonesia known as the Second Dutch Military Aggression, had a different goal. The capital of the Indonesian Republic, Yogyakarta, had to be attacked and its political leaders had to be captured. On the 19th of December 1948, the operation began, ushering in the final and bloodiest phase of the War of Independence. This time, Chief of Staff of the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army and the Royal Dutch Army in the Dutch East Indies, Simon Spoor, was allowed to advance on Yogyakarta, where the political leadership of the Republic allowed itself to be taken prisoner. The second Dutch offensive, called Operation Crow, but better known in the Netherlands as the Second Police Action, consisted not only of a spectacular air offensive, but also a large-scale ground invasion. Just as in the first offensive, motorized columns followed the main roads to push deep into hostile territory and quickly take the most important cities and junctions. The military leadership and the bulk of the TNI, the Army of the Republic of Indonesia, managed to escape. The operation was less surprising than Operation Product, as Indonesian resistance was better organized. Once again, under heavy international pressure, the offensive was halted on the 5th of January. At the time of the ceasefire, the Netherlands had, on paper, occupied all of Java as well as large and strategically important parts of Sumatra. The operation costed 113 Dutch lives, while more than 3,000 Indonesians were killed on Java alone. The offensive was followed by another grim stalemate of guerrilla and counter-guerrilla warfare. Initially, the Dutch armed forces carried out large-scale clearing operations, making intensive use of artillery, the Corps Special Troops, KST, and air power. Both on Java and Sumatra, the TNI suffered heavy losses. Outside the cities, however, effective Dutch control remained extremely limited, challenged not only by the TNI, but also by rival armed groups. The hardening of the conflict was reflected in a sharp rise of casualties. On the Dutch side, the number of soldiers killed rose from 34 per month before the offensive to 155 per month afterward, according to Dutch counts. Indonesian fatalities totaled 46,800. Violence escalated further as Indonesians who cooperated militarily or administratively with the Dutch authorities, policemen, plantation guards, informants, civil servants, and judicial officials were regarded by the Republic as legitimate targets for ruthless reprisals and intimidation. This too fueled the spiral of violence, combined with the establishment of Republican local shadow administrations. These factors caused the Dutch attempt at pacification to fail. Partially due to the repatriation of early troop contingents, the Dutch armed forces in the final years of the war suffered a severe shortage of experienced personnel, particularly officers. Dutch Commander Spoor observed with concern that relatively inexperienced soldiers were promoted prematurely and given responsibilities for which they were ill prepared. The military was required to control over larger areas, ultimately spread across some 2,000 isolated outposts located along or and at the end of long supply routes that were impossible to secure permanently. Along these so-called death roads, troops were extremely vulnerable to Indonesian attacks, and many outposts became more focused on survival than on clearing operations, let alone supporting the establishment of civilian administration. Historiography shows that Dutch countermeasures under these harsh conditions frequently degenerated into counter-terror. This was also acknowledged internally. One Dutch soldier wrote, "We have far too few troops and try to make up for it by acting more brutally, shooting everything off the roads and, if necessary, burning villages to the ground." A corporal noted, "Liberating the population looks more like exercising terror." The sharp rise in Indonesian casualties, though likely consisting mainly of fighters, may be read as supporting evidence of these observations. In April 1949, shortly before his death, Commander Spoor remained optimistic, although it was telling that how he claimed pacification would take not 3 to 6 months, but 18 months. In The Hague, the Drees van Schaik cabinet was far more pessimistic and placed little faith in Spoor's optimistic reports. Under heavy international pressure, the government decided in April to resume negotiations with the Republic. On May 7th, this led to the Rum van Rooyen Agreement and a ceasefire. On the 22nd of June, the Dutch evacuated Yogyakarta, an event that later became the basis of a persistent stab-in-the-back myth in which Dutch soldiers blamed national and international politics for the defeat they believed could have been avoided militarily. Spoor himself was far from happy about the agreement, but remained at his post. 3 weeks later, however, at the start of yet another long day of work, he got a heart attack and collapsed. A few days later, he died. He had literally worked himself to death. Sukarno returned to Yogyakarta early July as the Dutch were pressured to release him. A definitive ceasefire was proclaimed on the 10th of August for Java and on the 14th of August for Sumatra, in the period that followed up to the transfer of sovereignty on the 27th of December 1949. Dutch-Indonesian violence, unlike violence between Indonesians themselves, declined significantly. And thus, when the year of 1950 came around, the decolonization of Indonesia was a fact with the exception of New Guinea. Eventually, the Dutch were forced to cede this part of their former colony to Sukarno as well. Later, Indonesia came under the rule of a brutal dictator, Suharto. On my second channel, Actual History, I made a video on his legacy. Click here.